en el Caribe. Necesitamos transformar las desigualdades de género en las comunidades y los espacios urbanos. El estigma social, la violencia contra las mujeres y niñas, la salud menstrual y el poder del espacio patriarcales son problemas del desarrollo urbano. It is a pleasure to have the opportunity to deliver this presentation to the 13th Caribbean Urban Forum at the Pontificia Universidad, Católica, Madre, y Maestra in Dominican Republic. Today, I will discuss the state-led Latrine Eradication program facilitated in an urban development public agency in Trinidad and Tobago from a gender perspective. In a moment when international development agencies and multilateral banks have created guidelines for the inclusion of gender as a category of analysis and planning, the implementation of these projects and the extent to which they are gender responsive in their design have significant gaps. For this reason, the aim of this presentation is to solicit feedback on leading practices on mainstreaming gender equality in urban planning projects in the Caribbean. I also advocate for enhanced investment in redressing sanitation poverty throughout the region. The connections between latrines, health and environmental risk, social stigma, and informal settlement, or as my colleague said, self-built communities, are known by all in attendance here. What can we do further to effectively plan and advance sustainable sanitation systems and toilet culture in the Caribbean? Finally, I invite you, distinguished urban planners and policymakers in the development space, to imagine an urban planning practice that is decolonial and depatriarchal. But this does not stop with the profession alone. We can imagine a decolonial and depatriarchal future for Caribbean people where the values of gender, social, and spatial justice form part of our everyday lives. Sanitation poverty refers to a lack of adequate sanitation infrastructure and services necessary to access essential sanitation for individual and communal health and well-being. In high-density urban settings, a latrine puts people at a special risk to adverse health outcomes, contamination of ground and surface water networks, and experiences of gender-based violence, particularly sexual violence. Toilets and bathrooms may not be constructed in self-built communities due to the cost of amenities, plumbing services, and the absence of basic utilities such as water and electricity. In my field interviews, I learned that people with latrines spend significantly more time managing their bodies, labor, and health. This includes doing some form of bowel control, time loss for work, and even social issues, such as the perception of unfitness of a living environment for a co-parent who hopes to accommodate their child in the household and cannot due to poor household and sanitation infrastructure. Notably, the proliferation of self-built communities and latrines have been part of colonial life, as working class people form communities on the periphery of capital and metropolitan areas, many of whom were subject to exploitation by landlords who were also the regulators of that area. These people were considered dirty, unclean, nasty, and living outside of modernity. Latrines, therefore, became a symbolic and physical marker for life in the slums, which were very much implicated in the discourses and policies of slum clearance in the early 20th century. The legacies of colonial planning and urban spaces, specifically European obsession, investment, and audacity to define, correct, and order non-European spaces, informed its technocracy, top-down, racialized, and class-based spatial reordering, often through violence and force. These historical antecedents are key to understanding the context in which latrine eradication programs and sanitation poverty takes place today. The methodology of my research, which is part of a larger research project, is institutional ethnography. While I will not discuss the inner workings and processes of the specific public agency I study, in this presentation I would like to acknowledge the utility of this approach to urban planning. Institutional ethnography is rooted in feminist sociology. It was advanced by Dorothy E. Smith the pioneering British-born Canadian-based scholar who sought to explore social relations that structure people's everyday lives, how ordinary and mundane activities become sites of investigation. The study of client-institutional relationships, examination of decision-making processes, and the inclusion of gender analysis make institutional ethnography a generative method. For example, it helps us understand the gaps between physical development plans and the process of project selection in one fiscal year. It can explain the ways that incident reports by project supervisors illustrate labor conflicts on construction sites or conceal unsafe work practices. Institutional ethnography can examine feedback, formal and informal, and assess the ways they are included, discarded, or rendered as complaints in the office when projects are implemented. With an analysis of archival data, reports, joint select committee submissions, alongside ethnographic note-taking, while walking in the field, I was able to identify the ways in which gender inequalities are rendered invisible in urban planning through the Latrine Eradication program. Before I provide context on the proliferation of latrines in the world, I recognize that pit latrines are a basic form of improved sanitation and separate from open defecation. According to UNICEF, since 2000, as many as 545 million people use pit latrines or bucket latrines. Global data on toilet facilities are not readily available, but it is evident that global south regions, namely Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, are the most affected by this. Some countries, such as South Africa, implement a bucket eradication program to improve public health and eradicate poor sanitation structures.